Hi, everyone. This is John Daly. I'm here with another episode of the Daly Express. I'm very excited about today's two guests. They are the real deal, ladies and gentlemen. Both are Green Berets and former covert operatives. At least I think they're former. I guess we might find out more about that, but maybe not. They were involved in all kinds of major events and serious operations over a span of decades. They are also authors and now consultants for Showdog Studio in Franklin, Tennessee, where they are working on count them, three 80s espionage shows, including American Ronin, which sounds eerily similar to their life stories. I'm talking about Nick Brokhausen and Jeff Miller. We are also here today with Howard Klausner, the creative director and producer for Showdog Studio. How's it going, everybody?
Doing great.
Doing good. Thank you.
Excellent.
Awesome. Well, it's thanks for joining me. It's really great having you on, and I thank you for your service. You guys have had this almost lifelong friendship that became a business partnership. You were operatives for hire after serving in the military, sort of a prelude to private military contractors. That partnership has taken you all over the world and into some extraordinary events and circumstances, which we'll talk about in a little bit, a few of those. I wanted to kind of start at the beginning of that relationship. How did you two meet, and did you hit it off right away, or did it take a little time?
Well,
This is Nick's favorite story,
so I'll let him clean this story up. So I did. When I first met him, was on a NATO exercise in Western Europe, and I was working as a case officer, running the guerrilla groups and the underground and all that in response to the NATO exercise. I had to go into the exercise director headquarters, and as I pulled in the front gate, I'm going down, I have to go about a quarter of a mile and then take a right, and everything's over to the right. As I almost get to the intersection, I see this staff car coming down the road in reverse at about 60 miles an hour. He goes right in front of me, goes up this, the post commander's wife had this project where they took the patch that belongs to the Air Force and recreated it in flowers on the side of this hill. The staff car goes through the intersection, spins around doing donuts and that completely destroys the flower bed. It stalls and slides down to the bottom of the hill. I run over to see if anybody's hurt or anything, and this falls out of the driver's side. You have to get me away. And I looked down the road he came from, and there was like 6 MP cars a mile behind trying to catch up with him. So I got him in the car, and that's how I first met him. It was a pleasant exercise, and it turned into eventually a bad marriage.
Jeff, is that pretty much correct?
It was downhill.
I was giving a young lady a ride home from a beer fest in Stuttgart, where there'd been considerable drinking going on. And someone had left the keys in a car that belonged to the U.S. Army, and I felt that meant it was free for any member of the U.S. Army to use. So I loaded her in, and I was driving back to Stuttgart. To be honest, I don't remember the being in reverse part. I kind of remember the rest of it vaguely because there had been an immense amount of beer consumed.
There's a couple other things you left out you apparently didn't remember either.
But yeah, it was something like that. That was it. I knew who he was because he was in Berlin at the time. I was at Fort Devens, Massachusetts. But it's all sort of the 10th Special Forces Group. Berlin isn't technically part, or wasn't, because this is all many years in the past, wasn't technically part of the 10th, but did a whole lot of stuff with the 10th because the 10th had responsibility for Europe and basically the Cold War against Russia. So the people in Berlin, most of them had come out of the 10th, and everybody knew everybody. So I kind of knew who he was, but I'd never really gotten to know him. And then after that, when he left the service, he came over to Fort Devens. This was about 4 years later, 5 years later. I, at the time, was the non-commissioned officer in charge of counterintelligence at the 10th Special Forces Group Intel Company. So I had my own office. So he used to come around and hang out in the office because he knew everybody on the base there. And it was just a convenient place to hang around during the day. So then they started this rumor. Nobody really knew what I did. And the Pinguini, who is a character in the book and almost certainly will be a character on any future show, or at least on the American Ronin show, he was a master sergeant. He had a special charter from the colonel to do special things, and he had chosen 2 other NCOs, myself and one other, to like work with him, so nobody ever knew what we were up to. So then Nick got
or nothing. Let me tell you that right now. They had pins on the map on the wall and that. It was all show.
It was. Nick come over. His hair was long, and he had a kind of a Fu Manchu mustache.
What year was this, guys?
1982.
82.
82.
And so he's hanging around the office all the time, often wearing a blue suit. So all the officers start wondering who. I was standing in formation one day, and I almost never went to the formations, but for some reason I went to this one because the company commander was announcing something. And I'm standing there, and he's in the office because he's already out of the Army. And this captain comes over, and he sidles up next to me in the formation. He goes, "That guy in your office." And I said, "Yeah." "Is he one of your killer elite?" I swear to God, this is true. I'm like, what?
We got a lot of mileage out of that. Don't laugh.
So that the whole thing started. That's when the real partnership really started, because both the Pinguini and I were on our way out. So I think you got out in what, January or February?
March.
Oh, you got out in March. Pinguini got out in May. I got out in June. And the 3 of us went off to do civilian things, but without leaving the same basic business.
Right. So you mentioned the book. I should have mentioned the title, Upfront Vagabonds. That's sort of the basis for American Ronin, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. I'm always sort of fascinated by these long professional partnerships that withstand the test of time. I once watched an interview with Penn and Teller. It's a little different profession, but the comedic magicians. We know them. They've been together since the 1970s, and their secret, they said, to staying together so long was that they don't hang out with each other outside of work. They live very separate, detached lives until it's time to rehearse and do their shows. I get the impression that you guys are not like that, and that you do hang out a lot, both socially and professionally. That it's this genuine friendship. What makes the relationship work? Is it trust? Is it the way your personalities and skill sets sort of complement each other? What's the secret?
Certainly in the sex.
Well, first off, it's wax.
Could do better.
Yeah, we're not that kind of a couple.
Yeah. But you have to tell people all the time.
And I like
We're
to
not
think that
that
if I
kind of a
was
couple.
gay, I could do a lot better than this.
Sure, I could.
I have my preview clip for this podcast right there.
You got it right there. You really don't need anything else.
But I think it's waxed and waned over the years. I mean, we've spent time when we've been super tight doing everything together, and other times where we sort of drifted off in other directions, but always were in contact, and then come back together usually for a job of some kind. And then the book exists because we got trapped in the same apartment in Tucson during the COVID lockdown. And we didn't have anywhere to go or anything to do. So we spent our time, what was it, 67 days to write that book.
Yeah.
Which is basically just compilation of stories we'd been telling in bars for years anyway. And there's a lot of others, so we tried to pick the most interesting and funny ones. But there's a lot of other stories, so the show is going to be those stories plus whatever other stories we come up with. Because,
the other half of the the title is Tourists in the Heart of Darkness. So that's pretty much, is the theme throughout the book. And that is, we're going from this point to this point to this point. And hopefully the reader does too.
Yeah. And the viewer.
The viewer.
Yeah.
New genre.
Well, you guys have been, witnesses to world history, have been involved in world history, you have all kinds of stories. We'll see, some of them in American Ronin. I know you can tell, you can tell stories on everything from Watergate to the Iran hostage crisis to the Soviet Union, its collapse, to the Bosnian War. But since this is a podcast, we of course can't get into everything. So I'd like to ask you about the topic of kidnap for ransom recoveries in Mexico. You guys were involved in those, and I believe you, Nick, developed some kind of innovative technology to assist with those recoveries, and that brought you into some dangerous situations trying to employ that technology. Can you guys talk about that a bit?
Yeah, the technology was actually developed by an Israeli out of New Jersey. Brilliant guy. It was a chemical taggant. They'd taken a molecule, sent it to Oak Ridge Laboratories, and had them tweak it. So it came in a wax form and a liquid form, and you could put it on anything. And what would happen was it would emit the molecule in a gaseous form, and it was designed so it wouldn't go straight up into the stratosphere, that it would hover. And the more moisture you had in the air or smog, the longer it held itself to that path. So essentially, the machine that we were using was a gas chromatograph that was installed in a van with sniffing tubes that went to the outside. And the machine would take a big lung full of air, and then it would basically give you a reading of how many parts per million or how many parts per billion that it was detecting at that moment. And it would recycle like every 30 seconds. And that's what we're using. We put it on the money, and then you're able to track the money like a bloodhound. So I have a partnership in Mexico. The guy had sent a book, Francisco, not his real name, but he and I have been in the armoring business for 30 years, building armored cars in Mexico. Well, who buys armored cars? Rich people. Who gets kidnapped? Rich people. So eventually Carlos came to me and he says, "Oh, Nick, I have this friend, and his grandfather's been kidnapped. What can you do?" That's when I went and found a technology, and we started using it to track the kidnapping gangs down, and it worked excellently every time we used it. Now, it had been tried out by the FBI at their little Murphy town that they do all their demonstrations in. They wrote this big report that it wasn't feasible to use it. It had to be tweaked and improved and all that. 2 days after they issued that report, we were doing the first kidnapping case down in Mexico, and we recovered the guy. Actually, when we the half of the in order to work in Mexico, you have to understand the Mexican criminal code. If you buy kidnap and risk insurance, the insurance company doesn't pay your ransom. You have to go find the money to pay the ransom. If you follow all the rules, then you get your money back from the insurance company. And also, you have to have law enforcement involved. Well, just about 98% of the kidnappings in Mexico have law enforcement involved on the bad guy's side. It might be a patrolman, it might be a whole police department, it might be whoever. So the families are very nervous about letting the police into their homes. So they don't really want to have a large police presence in their house. So that's where we came in as consultants. And since we were providing a tool to the police, we were legally covered. Because I think under Article 328 or something like that, if you give money to the kidnappers without the police involved, you're part of the gang. You can be prosecuted as such. So it was kind of a thin wire you had to go. But we were extremely lucky in the counter kidnapping police that we got were just a great unit. I've been in a lot of special anti-terrorist units and that, and these guys were on par with all of them. And they paid their own money. They bought their own bullets. They paid for their own hotel rooms when they were on surveillance. They paid for their gas, their cars, and all that. So and got paid squat for it. So they were really good guys to work with. And we fit perfectly into the mold of what they were trying to do because we were taking down gangs one right after the other.
Wasn't there some part of this where you almost electrocuted somebody, some sort a high-profile general?
Well, that was actually the general who tracked down and killed Pablo Escobar from Colombia. It was actually his son that ran the operation where they trapped him in the house and finally shot him in that. And he had heard about the technology, and he came up to Mexico City to see it, and it just so happened that the machine broke down. So I'm talking to the guy in New Jersey, and he goes, well, there's one way to get it started again, but it's kind of dangerous. Okay, what do we have to do? He says, well, you can jolt it back awake with a pop of AC current, 220 or above. So we're in the basement of what was the name of it? The hotel right across from the U.S. Embassy used to be owned by the Lebanese. We're in the basement where the parking garage is, and they got one section that's got the chain link fence, and we're behind that chain link fence, and I got the thing on a makeshift table, and I got these two wires, and I touched it to the 440, and a ball of lightning shot across the room and hit the guy who ran the parking garage was hanging on the chain link fence watching us, and it hit square on that chain link fence. He dropped to the floor and that, but the machine started working, so it was good. And then the general's always...
That's what's important.
What are we going to do with him? I said, well, fortunately, when you're electrocuted, what normally happens is you have no memory of that event. So when he wakes up, we'll just tell him he had a heart attack, which is what we did. Well, it looks like he had a stroke, bud. But I didn't get the general. Just a parking attendant.
It's amazing what you learn in these things. I never knew that when you get electrocuted, you lose your memory.
Electroconvulsive therapy.
That's amazing.
What it is?
When we first started using tasers in Vietnam for prisoner snatchers and that, where I was back at Bragg and they were testing them. My team had the thing where testing them. We were testing darts and tasers and everything you can imagine for prisoner snatchers. And I came back to the team room and I walked in, there was all these mattresses laying on the floor, and my entire team is on the other side of the team room. As I walked in, they shot me with a taser right in the chest. The mattresses were there to break the fall, but they were over there because they'd already shot somebody, and the first reaction you have is that you empty your bowels explosively when you're hit with a taser, the old tasers anyway. So, I don't know how I got onto that.
That's never going to see light in the show that we're making, but it is an interesting factoid.
Well, we did it. We were testing darts, drugs, shoot them with a dart. And this guy, Manny, was the demo man. We shot we shot dogs, we shot some other stuff, and then we finally shot a bobcat. So we're sitting there going, well, we can have some fun with this. So we took the bobcat and went down to Kmart and bought this really bright fuchsia suitcase, Samsonite, drilled holes in it, shoved the bobcat in there, and went over to Lumberton where they have the Maidenform bra factory. And the people that work there are minorities, okay? So he took the suitcase down and put it at the bus stop just before the horn blew for the close of the day. And then we watched everybody come out. People look at it. They get on the bus. We kept seeing these same 6 guys waiting. As soon as the last bus left, they grabbed that suitcase and went down over the bank to the soccer field they had out there, and they had a screwdriver. When they opened that up, the bobcat was awake. And when you get drugged like that, the first thing you get is a migraine headache. So you have a hot, dehydrated bobcat with a migraine. when they opened it up, he got all 6 of them, either bit or clawed him before he bounced off the last one and took off in the woods. So, yeah. Science.
Wow. Well, you guys, I know you also helped with parental child abductions throughout the 90s, getting children back from places like the Middle East and Central America. Jeff, I believe you told me, we spoke a little bit before this, that you found this work especially rewarding. Can you talk about what you guys did? A lot of people may not realize that this is still a very big issue, a very big problem today.
The last estimate I saw from the Missing and Exploited Children website was 30,000 are overseas, kidnapped, usually by the father. We found, I only actually remember one father who was trying to get his kid back that was taken by his wife out of a whole bunch. The first one came about because this guy that we knew is a journalist and into all kinds of weird stuff. We could write a whole book about him and his weirdness, because there is a thing in the book about when we got involved with the whole California satanic cult panic. He was part of that.
His girlfriend / wife was a therapist.
A therapist. He doesn't like when I call her a shrink. Anyway, he knew this PI that he was working with on this satanic stuff, who knew this family out in Minnesota, whose the mother's 2 children were kidnapped and taken to North Africa. And he asked me if I thought, that we, by we meaning basically me, Nick, and Penguini, could do anything about it. And I said, yeah, sure, because why not, And we had another friend that was doing this kind of thing. So I figured, well, if he can do it, we can do it. So I accepted the job, and then realized that both Nick and the Penguini were out of the country, because we weren't living in clothes. So I'm calling on the phone, calling both their brothers. Have you seen them? Nobody's seen them. Where are they? I'm like, damn. So got to go do a reconnaissance. So I got this guy Cosmo, who is a whole interesting story but in himself. But he spoke French. And we were going to a part of North Africa that speaks French. So I thought, well, it'd be cool to have a French speaker along, even though I don't think he knows what the hell he's doing, which turned out to be wrong. He knew what he was doing. He was just afraid to do it most of the time. So we went and did the recon. And fortunately, by the time the recon was over, both Nick and Penguini were back. So I was like, oh, thank God. It's nice when you're doing these things to have people that you trust along with you.
It's essential.
But we needed a bigger team, so I hired some other guys from the SF Reserve Unit, one of whom didn't work out at all. So we wound up with 2 real questionable people on the team that time. We went to try to do it, and it turned into a complete cluster. We got scammed for $50,000 by some yacht broker.
A Brit.
British, yeah. And the guy that helped him with the scam was from that little tiny country in the Pyrenees Mountains in between Spain and France. Who could afford the yacht in the first place because he'd made a fortune smuggling things into South Africa that violated sanctions. There's a whole weird underground. But we did manage to recruit the assistance of people from the Union Corse, which is the Corsican Mafia.
Who did everything they said they would. On time. And in some of the stuff they actually repaired for us and never charged us for it.
Yeah, they were very, very, very wonderful to work with, those people. A little strange at points, but I don't want to get too deep into it, guys. It's going to be like a whole
What do you
couple of
consider strange?
episodes, and I want to tell the whole story. But we got involved with some really interesting people. The first try was a complete failure. The second try was a success. Mostly because on the second try, I had a team of people I knew better and were closer to. Even though Cosmo went completely crazy, and this one other officer that we hired went completely crazy because they couldn't handle the stress. So that made it difficult. But it ultimately was successful, and we're on our way back. We got them all out. We're back with the kids and the mother. Arriving at the Minneapolis airport, there's people with balloons and signs and a whole cheering section, and they come out of the plane. So we just walked off to the side and we're standing kind of alone because this crowd of well-wishers didn't have any clue who we were, and we didn't particularly care if they had any clue who we were. But the the grandmother, who had actually financed all this, and it cost her about $180,000. These things are not cheap, even though we weren't making all that much money for ourselves. Well, that included the $50,000 that we got scammed on the yacht. She
That
came
was back
over.
when we were both Presbyterian.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we were.
different.
She was completely in tears, and she came over and she was like, I never really could bring myself to believe that I would ever see them again. Her two grandchildren, a 5-year-old girl and a 3-year-old boy. And,
Yeah, the father.
that makes it very worthwhile over and above what you might get paid. That makes it very worthwhile to me. I'll never forget that incident. It's one of the highlights of the whole 50 years to me.
I can only imagine. I mean, that is such a wonderful thing you guys were able to do, bring that family back together again and bring other families back together. I wanted to come back to your work these days on Showdog Studio and also bring Howard into this. Showdog is an exciting, fairly new production company but it's got some industry veterans at the helm. John Attard, the company's founder, comes from the visual effects world. He's worked on huge blockbusters, including The Avengers, Gladiator, and Minority Report. Howard, you wrote Space Cowboys. That's sort of a beloved movie. I know these two next to you are big fans as well. And you wrote the screenplay for Reagan, a recent film that came out with Dennis Quaid. Showdog seems to be interested in telling these human stories in an authentic, real life way. Is that what sort of drew you to these two? Because you respect that authenticity, you want to give people sort of an accurate portrayal of these types of events.
100%. That's what we're doing here, and just we really want you to meet that, as we talked about before we went on the air, that there's sort of a perception of what you think the quote special operators really are, if you want to call them that. By the way, these guys can't stand that term. But really the stories that we see portrayed, and then you meet the real guys but they're very humble guys, but they're telling you some really funny little anecdotes and some interesting little anecdotes. These guys were at the leading edge of some of the biggest moments historically, globally, for the United States and the Western world. They were there, they were on the ground, and yet they're real guys, and they didn't get their way out of things with Rambo like tactics. Sometimes they had to really be bailing wire and smart, and their stories are just so compelling. So to go back to Showdog and to how we landed with these guys, John, of course, has a military background. We've both been in the movie business 30 years each, a piece. And we just know a great story when we hear it, and we know heroes when we see them, and they're much more like real guys. So when this book Vagabonds came across our transom, we went, oh, we want to meet these guys. And so sure enough, we've got a plethora of things going on here between an animated feature and we've got this entire series that we're creating together here, and they're all sort of corresponding right when these guys were like really at the peak of what they did. And so they touch on all three of our shows. And so, yeah, as you asked earlier, are you laughing all the time? Yeah, but they have some really funny stories, but they have some real stories too. So we fell in love with these guys instantly and said, let's build this world right now.
So we're staying away from the story where we caught you and John in a hotel room with chicken?
Yeah, that's all. Yeah, that's what we,
Just so I know.
Well, yeah, I'll mention the shows a little more. I sort of touched on them at the beginning, but these are all from the same 80s espionage universe, though from different genres and subgenres. There's a puppet about a U.S. senator who's actually an Iranian mole and spy who wants out of her mission. It's easy. I imagine that's easier said than done. There's the Bay Club about a bartender who's accused of being a spy, sort of a conspiracy theory angle to that. And there's American Ronin, the true story of these really good-looking guys, these two veterans who became disillusioned by the justice system and lay the groundwork for these private military contractors, which we hear much more about today. Yeah, it's just I feel like Showdog is really sort of going after like this American spirit, angle. Am I right about that, Howard?
Oh, 100% again. Yeah, for sure. The world is shifting quickly. I think we can all see that. And one of the things that is our mission in our life, and it seems like, wow, like our moment has come back to us, is people love the heroic. They love real heroes, not these comic book things, not superheroes. Marvel movies are great, they're all that, but it's real guys. And that's what John and I, that is our focus. Real stories about real people and heroic. We really don't like to knock down America. We don't like to knock down our heroes. We don't like to knock down God or the family or anything like that. We just tell great stories. And so this fits right in that universe for us. So we feel like this is a major part of our operation right now is these three shows and these two guys.
And I think there's a real appetite, like you said, for that type of storytelling. Whenever you see, sort of the American exceptionalism, the American traditions highlighted in television shows and cinema, there's a big audience for it. And it feels like sometimes Hollywood doesn't take advantage of that, doesn't focus to that audience. But I think it's great that Showdog is doing this.
Well, I think there's a couple things there, thematically that, from my specific work, one of them was Reagan last year, which was one of those, boy, don't touch anything that has anything to do with politics. It wasn't a political movie. It was the story of the man's life. And boy, did people really respond to that with emotion, with heart, and going back to Space Cowboys, these guys are space cowboys to me. There's like, that was one of
my favorite movies.
The Clint Eastwood world that I came up in. These guys represent that, and I think that's what you're catching. It that Showdog happens to just be taking that wave on the surfboard right now. This is what's happening. It's wonderful. There's like a reawakening happening in the country right now, and so yeah, it's great stories that inspire you. They're still funny and they're still rough, but they're real, and so I think that's really what you're catching here.
When that movie Reagan came out, it struck me. So I grew up in the 80s. Reagan was just this larger than life character, this beloved character, beloved president. Won 49 states in his reelection. I mean, the country was very, very happy with him for the most part. And it's just there's so many. There hasn't been that many film, television projects over the years on Reagan, and most of the ones that did come out of that were sort of in a negative light. They kind of wanted to tear the man apart. And it was just when Reagan came out that you wrote the screenplay for. It was just sort of struck me as like, wow, how has it taken this long for this sort of presentation of Reagan to come out? And I think it's great that you did that.
Well, thank you. It did take a while. Yeah, but that's again going back to the consciousness and why we were attracted to these guys as characters. It's like it's like the hero is back. I think we're starting to look at our country again. Look, there's a lot of strife. There's a lot of stuff going on. We all know that. But there does seem to be a wave where we're waking back up to, you know what? We are America, and we're dang strong, and we do a lot of good in this world. And ultimately, you love to tell some of these rough stories, but these guys were the leading edge of good. They're rescuing kidnappers. They're, so sort of the operations that are keeping us safe that people can't know about. That's where these guys were, and that's the celebration that Nick and Jeff really bring to us. And man, they're just great stories. They're just you can sit and listen to these guys' stories and just never move because they're that compelling.
Well, I can't wait to see the shows from Showdog Studio. Nick, Jeff, Howard, it was great talking to you. This was a lot of fun. I think people are going to enjoy what Showdog Studio is working on. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
You'll be sure that we're described as rough and not rough trade.
I'll add that to the show notes.
And compellingly handsome. Don't forget compellingly handsome. That's the thing with these guys.
Great. Well, thanks, everybody. Hope you have a great day.
You too.
We're going to try.
Thank you, John.